It's been exactly 1 year since I started this Growing Pomegranate Trees from Seed series. My plan for today is to shore up these flimsy stems. Two of the shorter ones are actually just offshoots of the main stem, and the third one there is just buried. So this is actually not the first time I'm shoring up these stems and offshoots with more 75% sand, 25% clay soil mixture. The soil line used to be really high, much higher, even higher than that when I first started, but as I watered, the sand and clay particles just sort of interlaced with each other. They settled, and as you can see, the volume reduced by a lot. So I would start with wet stuff next time, but for a transplant it is tricky. That's why for all my new series I just start directly in wet 75%, 25% mix. So there's no compacting. I pre-water it a lot. So as the weeks went by, it was sort of the same old, and I would tie this to secure the main stem, which kept falling over, and sort of dragging the other two offshoots with it in the same direction with these soft pieces of string attached to a metal wire rack to its left. And it looks okay now, but if that thing's left alone for more than a day, it'll just fall over in the wind. So right here I'm using a very high concentration of fertilizer. It's Miracle-Gro. I basically follow the instructions for how much to dissolve using the big scoop, little scoop, green plastic, double-sided scoop that comes with those blue crystalline packets. It's a small box of fertilizer. Mine is actually quite old. I don't really think those things expire just sitting here, especially not in this dry climate. But yeah, you never know if there's any chemical changes over time. But as you can see, whenever I release this piece of string, then this thing looks to be okay, but over time it's just going to fall in one direction, and such as here, it just impaled itself on the Joshua tree. So oftentimes it's windy on this balcony, and you can see there's a little bit of branching here on these offshoots off the main stem, which is pretty nice. And there's breeze sprouting going on where all those leaves were lost. It does seem there's a little bit of leaf burn, so I'm going to prune and see if that improves something. I've been very loath to prune further than that because all the foliage was at the top, but it seems in order to match my goal of getting this thing to stand up on its own, I might have to prune many more inches than that. So there does seem to be some new growth, but at the same time the foliage is kind of light colored, and it definitely looks like there's a lot of leaf burn, which I later concluded to be salt burn, because in part of adding all these doses of fertilizer directly at the base of the stem. So there's a little bit of faultiness with the instructions, I believe. It just produces a Miracle-Gro solution that's way too concentrated. So when I talk about salt burn, I don't really even mean just salts. Any solutes will have the same effect, such as if you were to pour in a lot of sugar right on top of the soil and water, that would get in, and that would be a very high concentration of non-salt solutes. And what that would do is the same thing. It would suck water out of the roots. The roots of a plant just absorb water passively through osmosis, and normally there's a certain concentration of salt in the plant cells for the roots. So on day 465 there's no more salt burn. Leaves do, the new ones look a lot better now. So as I was saying with the salt burn, if you have a very high concentration of salts and solutes in the soil surrounding the roots, then it'll suck the water out of the plant. And many animals at least have a physiology that's sort of like, I believe 150 millimolar of sodium chloride at least. That doesn't even account for all the other things in there. So I don't know what it is for plants, but I do believe that certain plants and animals and microbes are adapted to very salty conditions by having even higher concentration of solutes in their cells than the surrounding environment. So I'm just pruning away here, and of course that hurts to lose all that progress, but may be necessary. You can see at the bottom the soil is kind of cracked open because that's caused by this whole apparatus waving around. So when the main stem goes and falls over, it causes the two offshoots to bend. So I just keep ending up at square one with this whole getting this pomegranate sad seedling to stand up project, and I'm pruning away all these leaves with saltburn. There's also a lot of curled leaves, so it's basically all sort of the same thing, except at a lesser scale. And I'm applying some imidacloprid now. The last thing I would need at this juncture is bugs and other parasites to be preying on my plant, although I would say the pomegranate seems to not really attract pests. There are other much tastier leaves from other species on my balcony that it seems like all parasites prefer, so I often do this distilled water spraying just to wash off any residue, chemical residue, although just that stuff being on the stems probably wouldn't cause all that much damage, but as you can see, just a little bit of wetting and everything falls over, so it's pretty much hopeless. I didn't think that pomegranate would be like this. I thought that if you had foliage that looks seemingly healthy like here, that the stems would be able to support it. So on day 492 I moved. I lived in the old complex for about 10 years. The new balcony is 50% bigger. I'll show you the view later. And everything looks like it's standing up now, but not really, because if I were to wet these leaves, or if this pot was outside and it rained, everything would fall over. So during the second half of April 2020, it was very hot and humid, and that resulted in growth spurt for all of my plants. But this balcony, this new balcony, receives no direct sunlight and continues to receive no direct sunlight as of the making of this episode, by which it's already early June. So that's a very long time to have no direct sunlight, but all my plants have grown really well. I'm using a more diluted concentration of Miracle-Gro right now, and again I'm spraying to wash off residue. You can see the discoloration from the blue color that's stained into the soil at the base of this plant, at the base of the main stem. So everything's falling over again. This bottom one, this second offshoot, is really sad. But you can see from this action here that the whole thing just goes flaccid when you add a little bit of water weight to the foliage. So all my other plants can stand up well. This one calls itself a tree but can't. I don't understand why that is, but on day 499 I drilled two larger holes at the bottoms of all my outer waste baskets and all of these dual stacked Rubbermaid waste baskets that I'm using as pots. So the water ran out, it stank, it was fetid. There was no real purpose in that because I always ended up having to sort of drain my pots manually by tilting them to one of the four sides to get the water to run off. So there's no point. I created a total 100% draining solution by drilling holes at the very bottom of all the outer waste baskets. So now I can water to my heart's content. I can pour infinite volumes of water or fertilizer through there and do some equilibration when I please. It's day 505. The foliage looks a lot better now, and that one at the bottom, even, it doesn't really see any sunlight, just sitting there against a wall. There's a little bit of wall before you can see outside the balcony. So this top bit here receives the most amount of sunlight, but it's all indirect, probably in the low thousands of lux, even during the best times of day. So 8 days ago, prior to 514, I gave each of my plants about half a gallon of fertilizer, which was prepared according to the Miracle-Gro box instructions, one of the large end scoops into each gallon. So the growth seemed to stall out for all of my 6 plants at the same time. I definitely knew after a few days what was up. So I think in this case the salt and solute concentration in most of my pots was sort of equal to what's inside of the plant cells, the plant roots, and therefore the plants were unable to use water despite sitting in wet soil and sand mix. So I decided to flush out all of my pots with tap water several times, and at this juncture I just can't use distilled water. I have a water distiller, I just simply can't make enough water, and we're approaching summertime, so there's no way I can combat that kind of evaporation by using that small amount of distilled water I can produce every day. So tap water it is. And now that everything's completely draining, basically if I water enough, the concentration of salt and solutes in the soil should eventually equilibrate to the tap water. So that would be very low. So you can see the foliage looks really good now. 4 days ago I did another great flush after the flush you just heard. So this is the end result. The foliage looks beautiful. The leaves actually look a lot greener in all of my plants actually. So even the mango, the neighbor to the right, that foliage perked up. It gained turgor pressure again, and it's actually working on a new shoot at the very top when it's been doing nothing for months, probably just due to the salt concentration, solute concentration being too high in the soil. So I thought I was doing it a favor by fertilizing, but like in this case I actually wasn't. So that leads to the natural conclusion: if I were to just keep flood watering and let everything pass through and drain out with many gallons of tap water for everything, that's great for providing water and getting rid of waste products. Basically it would introduce a lot of oxygen as well. Tap water, municipal tap water, does have a lot of dissolved oxygen in it. So just by me doing these flushes every few days or every week, even if it's a gallon or more, I don't think it's sufficient to wash out everything in there. These are very slow draining pots. The avocado pot to the left actually drains the fastest, and even that's not very quick. So in the future I think I'll go with a lower percentage of clay soil, maybe just 1/8 by volume, and the rest will be sand, and that will drain very quickly and be very convenient for me and produce superior results. But in the meantime it is what it is. I'm not going to do another transplant because that would be so much trouble. Since the plant's doing well now, I'll just let it run like this for a while and see how far this gets me. If I do fertilize in the future, it'll just be a tiny pinch. Thanks for watching.